Okay, so today we're going to go over the best squares for the knights. So firstly, the most natural squares out of the opening, C3 and F3 for your knights. And we'll go over why. The key squares you want to look out for your knights are these ones. So along the 5th rank and these two here. Now I'll explain why in a bit more detail. Just quickly and obviously, this one, to make it symmetrical, it's probably not that crucial of a square, so I'm going to leave it out. But essentially, if you can get your knights to any of these squares, they are probably in their best squares. Now, hey, firstly, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Philip. I'm a 2100 FIDE rated player from New Zealand, and my goal with this channel is to get you up to 2000 ELO as quickly as possible. So why are these squares so important for the knights? Well, let's take a look at this knight first. We've got our knights developed out of the opening. Let's put it here. When the knight's here, it attacks these two very important squares in black's position, as well as this square. For instance, if black brings a pawn out, there's all sorts of knight sacrifices here, and just pressuring the black position pretty much like a thorn in black's side. So if there's a pawn here or a pawn here to support the knight, even better. Likewise, the knight could come over here, and when it's on g5, it really is in that prime attacking position. If you're attacking a kingside castled king, a knight on g5 is something that you should be looking for at all times, because it's just so powerful. Even if let's say there's a pawn here, there's sacrifices that can be done on that pawn over there. Queen coming out from e2 to h5, attacking, checkmating, all that kind of stuff. Now we've covered these two squares. That's what this knight jumps into. The other square that this knight jumps into is d4. d4 is really important because it actually leads to the next square on the 5th rank, f5. So if we go, the knight just has really powerful influence from d4, really, especially these two squares. Again, the e6 square is a key theme because there's a whole bunch of sacrifices that normally happen. Normally the knight doesn't get to that square because black usually has a pawn on f7, or vice versa if it was flipped around. White usually has a pawn on f2. So let's just say black goes, that's white's move. White goes here. The knight is super powerful here because it really puts pressure on black's king across these squares. So again, if you had a queen here, bring it out to here, you've got all sorts of mating threats out here, or checks on h6 or sacrifices on h6 if black had a pawn here, really busting open the black position. So that's that knight in a nutshell, the f3 knight. That square, that square, that square. Now, likewise, this knight covers that square, and this square is not too important, so we won't look at it now, but this square as well, because once it goes to here, again, it jumps to this square, but also these two really important squares. Again, if you're attacking, knight to f6 is a common theme in so many variations, whether it's sacrificing on f6 or just hitting dead air and just jumping onto the square to pry open the black position. There's so many things that can come from it. Also, once the knight goes to e4, let's just say black plays h6. No, let's go b5 instead. So this is again another very typical position pattern. So the knight jumps into here, let's just say h6, supported by a pawn on b4. That knight is super powerful on c5 because it takes away b7, which is a common square for black's bishop, d7, which is just right in the middle of the black position, and again e6. So yeah, now we've essentially discovered that we've looked at this, and this. We've got one more to look at, d5. Knight on d5. Again, there's two squares, e7 and f6, that it just eyes out like a monster. And again, if you had a pawn supporting it either on c4 or e4, and nothing that could kick the knight out, so if black had a pawn on c5 and e5, and he couldn't get rid of that knight, he's in trouble. If he had a pawn on c6, that's good for black. As you normally would expect, he would want to get rid of that knight as soon as possible out of that square, or just prevent the knight from going there in the first place. So let's take a quick recap of that. In the middle game, these 5th rank squares are extremely crucial. Even these two squares, because they're so accessible to the knights, and they're much harder to kick from these squares, they're very influential on these squares. Last but not least, I'm going to cover this square, d6, which is what I call the octopus square. It might even be referred to that by others as well, but octopus because if I go there, here, a knight on d6 or d3 for black is often referred to as an octopus knight, because the 6th rank is the strongest rank to get your knights to, because they just have such massive octopus-like tentacle influence on the whole position from here. They really can cripple the opponent's position, especially if they're protected by a pawn on c5 or e5. If you get your knight to d6 and can stabilize it there, oh my goodness, you have a very strong strategic grip on the position. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of attacking motives on f7, not to mention just really compressing and condensing the black position. The rooks won't be able to go onto c8 or e8. Even when they're on d8, they can't pressure the knight. If it's protected, they'd often have to sacrifice a rook to get rid of that knight, because it's just such a thorn in the side. So let's go back to the starting position. Final recap. Actually, before we do a final recap, just avoid the edges, because if you get a knight on the edge, it's usually limiting its scope. Sometimes h4 is, funnily enough, okay, because that's the knight just rerouting to get to f5. But if you're going backwards, or I don't know, if you're going, let's say, a2, it really does nothing, because then what's the best square it goes to? Like b4, but then b4 is not a great square either. Again, you're just trying to get to d5 in those key central positions and squares. So even though this looks like an empty board, you want to really be targeting these squares for your knights, and this is your golden square. So look, we'll leave it at that. Keep an eye out for your knights. Put them in the best positions they can be, because chess is about making the most out of every single piece. We're all working together, or making sure that they're all working together. So yeah, let me know what you think of the video. Like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.